My name is Sydney. I am 33 years old, and up until my older sister's wedding day, I actually believed my family loved me. I stood at the entrance of a luxury country club in Atlanta, wearing a gown I had saved up for months to buy. The wedding planner blocked my path and handed me a cheap paper badge that read, Limited Access Guest. My mother pulled me aside, whispering that I did not fit the aesthetic of her new wealthy in-laws, and instructed me to stand by the bar without eating. Instead of crying, I simply smiled, walked right over to the ornate gift table, retrieved my envelope containing a $50,000 cashier check, and walked away. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth and treated you like a second-class citizen. Growing up, I was always the invisible one. My sister Chelsea was the golden child. She was 36, obsessed with appearances, and claimed to be a lifestyle influencer. I was just the pragmatic younger sister who became a forensic accountant. I spent my days investigating financial fraud and my nights paying off the debts Chelsea left behind. But today was supposed to be different. Today was her wedding to Kendrick, a highly successful corporate lawyer from a prominent and elite Black family here in Atlanta. Kendrick was wealthy, polished, and obsessed with his family reputation. Chelsea had spent the last 2 years bending over backward to pretend she came from the same level of generational wealth. And my parents, Brenda and Thomas, played right along with her delusions. I arrived at the reception hall just as the string quartet began playing. The venue was breathtaking, draped in white silk and imported orchids. I approached the grand mahogany doors, eager to find my seat. But the wedding planner, a woman with a headset and a tight smile, stepped directly into my path. She held up a clipboard and scanned the VIP list. Then she handed me a bright yellow paper badge with the words, Limited Access Guest, printed in bold black letters. It looked like a wristband for a cheap carnival, completely out of place against my silk evening gown. Before I could even ask what this meant, my mother Brenda materialized from the crowd. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin, and pulled me behind a massive floral arrangement. She looked me up and down with absolute disdain. Listen to me carefully, Sydney, she hissed. Kendrick family paid for half of this reception. These tables cost $250 per plate. We had to invite Kendrick's senior partners and his influential relatives. We simply do not have the space or the budget for you to sit at the main tables. You are just an accountant. You do not fit the aesthetic we are trying to present to his family. I stared at her, the words ringing in my ears. I had spent the last 3 weeks helping her finalize the catering menu and organizing the seating charts. Now I was being demoted. So where exactly am I supposed to go? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. My mother gestured vaguely toward the back of the room near the kitchen doors. You can stand by the bar. The bartender will give you tap water. But do not try to take a plate from the buffet. Those are for the real guests. Just stay out of sight and do not embarrass your sister tonight. For a moment, the old me would have cried. The old me would have rushed to the bathroom, wiped away my tears, and stood quietly in the corner just to keep the peace. But the forensic accountant in me, the woman who dealt with liars and frauds every single day, took over. I felt a cold clarity wash over my mind. I looked at my mother and smiled. It was a terrifyingly bright smile that made her take a step back. I did not say a word to her. I turned around and walked directly into the main reception hall. I ignored the wedding planner who tried to call after me. I marched right past the $250 plates, past the crystal centerpieces, and straight toward the ornate bird cage that served as the gift box. My mother gasped and hurried after me, but she was too late. I reached my hand into the decorative cage and pulled out the thick silver envelope with my name on it. Inside that envelope was a cashier check for $50,000. For months, my mother and Chelsea had relentlessly pressured me into handing over my life savings. They begged and guilt-tripped me, claiming Chelsea desperately needed this money to secure a stake in the new mansion Kendrick was purchasing. They told me it was my duty as a sister to help her maintain her wealthy facade. Chelsea, who was standing nearby greeting some of Kendrick's cousins, saw me holding the silver envelope. Her fake plastic smile vanished instantly. She excused herself and rushed over her heavy bridal gown, swishing across the marble floor. "What are you doing?" Sydney Chelsea demanded in a harsh whisper. "Put that back right now. Kendrick is looking at us right now." I opened the envelope, pulled out the $50,000 check, and held it up. Then slowly and deliberately, I ripped the beautiful congratulatory card right down the middle. I folded the precious cashier check and slid it safely into my designer purse, making sure she saw it disappear. "Limited guests give limited gifts," I said loud enough for her to hear over the music. "I think you will absolutely not be needing my hard-earned money anymore. Good luck with paying the expensive caterer all by yourself tonight." I turned on my heel and began walking toward the grand exit. The heavy mahogany doors swung open and the cool evening breeze hit my face, bringing a sense of instant relief. I could hear the muted sounds of the jazz band playing inside, but all I focused on was the gravel driveway leading to the valet stand. I handed the attendant my ticket and waited, wrapping my silk shawl tightly around my shoulders. I did not look back. I knew my mother and Chelsea were probably in a state of absolute panic, scrambling to figure out how to cover their tracks. Before the valet could even pull my car around, the heavy front doors burst open again. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel behind me. It was my father, Thomas. His face was flushed red, and his expensive tuxedo, which I knew he had rented using my credit card, looked strained across his chest. He marched up to me, his eyes darting around nervously to see if any of Kendrick's wealthy relatives had stepped outside to witness this scene. "Sydney, what on earth do you think you are doing?" he hissed, grabbing my elbow. "Get back inside right now, and hand that envelope over to your sister. You are causing a massive scene. You are embarrassing this entire family in front of Kendrick's prominent relatives." I pulled my arm out of his aggressive grip and took a step back. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but a desperate man trying to maintain a pathetic illusion. I was done being the silent bankroll for their delusions of grandeur. "I am embarrassing the family?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but laced with pure steel. "No, Dad. I am simply refusing to fund your lies anymore. You want to talk about embarrassment? Let us talk about numbers. Because as you love to remind everyone, I am just an accountant, and numbers never lie." My father puffed out his chest, trying to gaslight me the way he had done my entire life. "You are being hysterical and selfish. Your sister needs that money to secure her future with Kendrick. It is a loan. We will pay you back. You are ruining the most important day of her life over a petty grudge." I held up my hand, stopping his speech instantly. "A loan," I repeated, laughing humorlessly. "Let us review your repayment history, shall we? 3 years ago, I paid $12,000 to stop the bank from foreclosing on your house because you invested your savings in a failed crypto scam. 2 years ago, I paid $8,000 to cover Chelsea rent when she got evicted from her luxury apartment, a fact you both conveniently hid from Kendrick. Last year, I co-signed the lease on Chelsea car because her credit score was hovering around 400. And just 6 months ago, I paid off your $15,000 credit card debt so you could pretend to be affluent enough to host Kendrick family for dinner." My father's face went from pale to a deep mottled purple. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off again, stepping closer so he could hear every single syllable clearly. "I have sacrificed my 20s to keep this family afloat." I continued, my voice steady and cold. "I have lived in a tiny apartment, driven a 10-year-old car, and worked 80-hour weeks while Chelsea paraded around pretending to be a wealthy influencer. That $50,000 check was my life savings. You and Mom manipulated me into believing it was an investment in a property. But we both know Kendrick has no idea that money was coming from me. You were going to let Chelsea hand it to him and claim it was her own trust fund. You were using my blood, sweat, and tears to buy her a place in a high society family. I am done being your human ATM." The valet pulled my car up to the curb. It was a reliable, unflashy sedan that I had paid off entirely by myself. It looked completely out of place among the Bentleys and Mercedes parked nearby, but to me it looked like absolute freedom. I opened the car door, but before I could slide into the driver's seat, a loud, panicked shriek echoed across the driveway. "Sydney, wait." I looked up and saw Chelsea sprinting out of the country club. She was a complete mess. Her flawless bridal makeup was streaked with sweat, and she was hiking up her heavy designer dress, completely disregarding the expensive fabric dragging across the dirty gravel. She looked nothing like the poised, elegant bride she had been projecting all evening. She looked completely unhinged. She pushed past our father and lunged toward my car, her eyes wide with raw, desperate panic. "You cannot leave with that check," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You have to give it back to me, now." Kendrick's prominent family members were starting to glance out of the floor-to-ceiling windows drawn by the commotion. My father frantically tried to shush her, terrified that the wealthy in-laws would see the golden child having a public meltdown. But Chelsea did not care about the optics anymore. She was hyperventilating, clawing at the window frame of my car. "I need that exact $50,000, Sydney," she sobbed, her voice dropping into a frantic whisper. "You do not understand. I wrote checks to the venue. I wrote checks to the florist, the caterer, the string quartet. I used an old account. The checks are going to bounce on Monday morning. The venue manager just told me they need the final payment cleared tonight, or they are going to call the police for fraud. If Kendrick finds out I have no money, he will cancel the honeymoon and file for an annulment. Please, I will do anything." I looked at her tear-stained face, processing the gravity of what she had just confessed. She had run a massive financial scam on her own wedding. She had written bad checks to luxury vendors, fully intending to use my life savings to cover her tracks before the banks opened on Monday. She had not just lied to her new husband, she had committed felony fraud. "You should have thought about that before you handed me a limited access guest badge," I said quietly. I pulled her hands off my car door, got inside, and pressed the lock button. Through the glass, I saw my father grab Chelsea by the shoulders, trying to physically restrain her as she began to scream and hit the window. I put the car in drive, pressed my foot on the gas, and drove smoothly down the long, winding driveway of the country club. I watched them shrink in my rearview mirror, a pathetic tableau of lies collapsing in real time. I turned onto the highway, merged into the fast lane, and took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, the crushing weight of my family expectations was entirely gone. I was finally free. But as I would soon discover the next morning, people like my parents and my sister do not just let their favorite victim walk away without a fight. They were about to make the biggest, most criminal mistake of their lives. I woke up the next morning to the harsh, unforgiving sunlight streaming through my bedroom blinds. The absolute quiet of my apartment was a stark, jarring contrast to the chaotic screaming I had left behind at the luxury country club. I stretched, feeling an unexpected sense of peace, and rolled over to grab my phone from the nightstand. The moment I tapped the screen, that peace shattered. The glass surface lit up, displaying 47 missed calls. Most were from my mother, a dozen from my father, and several from blocked numbers. My notification center was a solid, overwhelming block of frantic text messages. I scrolled through them, my eyes scanning the panicked, furious words. Chelsea checks had bounced exactly as she had feared. The luxury venue manager had arrived early that Sunday morning to process the final vendor payments, only to be met with insufficient funds alerts. Now, the country club was officially threatening to press criminal charges against my sister for check fraud. I opened my voicemail inbox and clicked on the single audio message my mother had left at 6 in the morning. I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to Brenda's vicious, trembling voice fill the quiet room. "How could you do this to your own blood?" my mother shrieked into the receiver, her voice shrill and completely unhinged. "The venue manager is threatening to call the police right now. Chelsea is locked in the bathroom of her honeymoon suite having a severe panic attack, and Kendrick is asking questions we cannot answer because he thinks the wedding was fully paid for. You ruined her marriage on day one, Sydney. You stole her future over a petty, jealous grudge. If you do not wire that $50,000 to her account by noon today, you are completely dead to this family." I deleted the voicemail with a single swipe of my thumb. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt or hesitation. For over a decade, I had been the silent shock absorber for their reckless financial decisions. I was the one who always smoothed things over, paid the exorbitant late fees, and kept their pathetic illusion of wealth intact. But stepping away from that toxic role gave me a terrifying, empowering sense of clarity. I got out of bed, took a long hot shower, and put on my sharpest tailored suit. I was not going to spend my Sunday hiding in my apartment feeling sorry for myself. I had a massive forensic accounting project due for a major client, and the quiet weekend office was exactly what I needed to clear my head and focus on something logical. I drove downtown to my firm, badged into the empty glass building, and sat at my organized desk. My job as a forensic accountant involved tracking hidden assets, exposing corporate embezzlement, and following the digital money trail when wealthy people lied. I was brilliant at my job. I spent the next 4 hours buried deep in complex spreadsheets tracing offshore accounts and matching bank statements. In the world of numbers, everything made perfect sense. Debits had to equal credits. Liars always left a permanent paper trail. There was no emotional gaslighting in mathematics. By noon, I felt highly productive and incredibly calm. I stepped out of my office to grab a black coffee from the break room. When I returned to my desk, my phone was vibrating violently against the polished wood surface. It was not just a few angry family texts this time. It was a relentless, non-stop stream of social media notifications. Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok were all going off simultaneously, lighting up my screen like a slot machine. I frowned, picking up the device. I had a very modest social media presence, mostly just a few hundred college friends and professional colleagues. I tapped on the very first notification. It was a direct message from a coworker asking if I was safe. Then another message from a former roommate saying I needed to check TikTok immediately before things got worse. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. I opened the application, and the very first video dominating my feed made my blood run completely cold. It was Chelsea. She was sitting on the edge of what looked like a luxury hotel bed wearing an oversized cozy sweater. Her face was completely bare of makeup and streaked with perfectly orchestrated glistening tears. The bold text caption across the screen read, "My jealous sister ruined my wedding and insulted my husband family." I tapped the screen to unmute the video, bracing myself. "Hi guys." Chelsea sobbed into the camera, her voice trembling with practiced theatrical vulnerability. "I really did not want to make this video, but I have to speak my truth before the rumors spread. Yesterday was supposed to be the happiest day of my entire life. I married the absolute man of my dreams. But my younger sister Sydney simply could not handle it. She has always been fiercely jealous of my success. Right before the reception dinner, she stole the envelope containing the vendor funds. She literally walked out with the money that was meant to pay for the catering and the venue, leaving me to face criminal fraud charges on my own wedding night. I stared at the glowing screen in absolute disbelief. She was completely twisting reality, turning her own long-standing financial fraud into a twisted narrative where she was the helpless victim of a malicious thieving sibling. But she did not stop there. The video cut to a second clip, and this time, Chelsea's tone shifted from sad to deeply morally offended. And the worst part, Chelsea continued wiping a fake tear from her cheek and looking directly into the lens. The real reason she caused a massive scene and walked out was because she was deeply uncomfortable being around my husband's relatives. Kendrick comes from a prominent black family, and Sydney made several highly inappropriate, racially insensitive comments about not wanting to sit at their tables. I am completely heartbroken. I had to choose between protecting my new husband and keeping my toxic sister in my life. I chose to protect my husband. The video ended and looped back to the beginning. I looked down at the view count. It had already surpassed 2 million views and was climbing rapidly. The comments section was a terrifying landslide of public hatred directed entirely at me. Thousands of strangers were calling for me to be fired, to be arrested, and to be completely ruined. Chelsea knew exactly what she was doing. In modern American society, weaponizing race and playing the ultimate victim on social media was a guaranteed ruthless way to completely destroy someone's life. She was trying to publicly execute my professional reputation so that when the $50,000 vendor fraud finally came to light, nobody would believe a single word I said. She wanted me to look like a racist, jealous thief to protect her own lies. My phone rang again, pulling me out of my shock. This time it was not my mother or my sister calling to harass me. The caller ID displayed the name of the senior managing partner at my accounting firm. The firm had a very strict morality clause, and a viral video accusing one of their top investigators of grand theft and racial discrimination was a corporate public relations nightmare. I answered the call, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Hello, Mr. Davis." "Sydney," my boss said, his tone icy, distant, and strictly formal. "I need you to pack up your desk and go home immediately. We have placed you on unpaid administrative leave pending a full internal investigation into the video currently circulating online. Do not contact any of our clients." The line went dead with a sharp click. I slowly lowered the phone to my desk. Chelsea had just crossed a dangerous line from which there was absolutely no return. She had not just stolen my peace of mind, she had come directly for my livelihood and my career. But she had made one catastrophic, irreversible miscalculation. She picked a public fight with a woman who professionally dismantled liars for a living. I hung up the phone and looked around my corner office. The quiet sanctuary where I had built a sterling professional reputation was suddenly compromised. I could see through the glass walls of my office. Several junior analysts and senior partners were huddled together near the water cooler, glaring at their phones and then glancing up at me. The video was spreading through the corporate network like a virus. My boss had ordered me to pack my things, and I knew better than to argue when corporate optics were involved. I calmly pulled a cardboard box from the supply closet and began placing my personal items inside. A framed certificate of my certified fraud examiner license, a small potted plant, my customized pen set. Every item I placed in the box felt incredibly heavy. I had worked 80-hour weeks for 6 years to earn my position at this firm. I had sacrificed holidays, relationships, and my own mental health to climb the corporate ladder. And in less than 12 hours, my sister had managed to completely jeopardize all of it with a 60-second performance of fake tears. As I walked out of my office carrying the box, the entire floor went dead silent. Nobody offered to help me. Nobody asked for my side of the story. The accusation of racial discrimination was radioactive. In the corporate world, simply being accused of making Kendrick family uncomfortable was enough to make me a complete pariah. I took the elevator down to the parking garage in total silence. By the time I reached my car, my phone battery was draining rapidly from the sheer volume of incoming notifications. I sat in the driver's seat and opened the social media applications again, needing to assess the full scope of the damage. Chelsea had not just stopped at one video. She had posted a follow-up clip doubling down on the lies. In the second video, Chelsea was sitting on a plush couch holding a tissue to her nose. She looked directly into the camera and said, "I want to thank everyone for the overwhelming support. It is incredibly hard to accept that my own sister could harbor so much bitterness. Kendrick and I are trying to salvage what is left of our honeymoon, but we are absolutely devastated." To answer your questions, yes, Sydney was furious that she was not seated at the main table. But those tables were reserved for Kendrick's immediate family. I tried to explain to her that his family customs and their presence were important to us, but she made some very pointed, very cruel remarks about not wanting to be associated with them. I cannot repeat what she said, but it broke my heart. She literally snatched the vendor money and left us to face the police. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She never explicitly said a racial slur, but she heavily implied it, weaponizing the current social climate to ensure I would be completely destroyed. The internet mob was relentless. People were finding my professional profile and leaving thousands of angry comments. Some users had even tracked down the official business page of my accounting firm, flooding it with one-star reviews and demanding my immediate termination. They were doxing my home address, posting pictures of my apartment building, and calling my office switchboard. I drove home taking back roads to avoid any potential harassment. The sheer scale of the fallout was terrifying. Chelsea had successfully painted me as a jealous, bitter spinster who deliberately ruined a beautiful multicultural wedding out of pure spite and prejudice. She had handed the internet a perfect villain, and they were ready to burn me at the stake. But as I pulled into my secure parking garage and carried my box upstairs to my apartment, the fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, burning determination. Chelsea thought she had won. She thought that by throwing me to the internet wolves, I would cower in fear, delete my social media, and quietly disappear in shame. She assumed I would be too busy trying to save my job to expose her $50,000 check fraud. But she had fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I did not deal in emotions or public relations. I dealt in verifiable data. I walked into my apartment, locked the deadbolt, and set the cardboard box on the kitchen island. I did not sit on the couch to cry. I walked straight to my home office and booted up my custom-built desktop computer. This was the same system I used to track multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement across international borders. Dismantling a fake influencer web of lies was going to be remarkably easy. I opened a new encrypted folder on my desktop and named it Chelsea Wedding Fraud. The first step in any forensic investigation is preserving the evidence. I used a software program to screen record every single video Chelsea had posted, capturing the captions, the timestamps, and the comments. If she tried to delete them later, I would have the raw files securely backed up. Next, I logged into my primary bank portal. I navigated to my transaction history and applied a custom filter isolating every single transfer I had ever made to Chelsea accounts over the past 5 years. The numbers populated on my screen, line after line of financial abuse. $2,000 here for rent, $500 there for a car payment, $8,000 to stop an eviction. I exported the entire ledger into a master spreadsheet. Then I pulled up the most crucial piece of evidence, the cashier check for $50,000. I had taken a high-resolution photograph of the check front and back the day I withdrew it from my life savings. The check clearly displayed my name as the remitter. I placed the physical check on my scanner and created a fresh, crystal-clear digital copy. But bank statements were not enough to combat an emotional narrative. The internet loved drama, and I needed to provide context. I connected my phone to my computer and opened my cloud backup. I searched through my audio files until I found the exact recording I needed. Our family had a habit of having aggressive arguments over the phone, and years ago I had installed an application that automatically recorded incoming calls from my parents purely for my own sanity and protection. I found the voicemail my mother Brenda had left me 2 weeks before the wedding. I played the audio file through my studio monitors. My mother's voice filled the room, crisp and incredibly damning. "Listen to me carefully, Sydney," the recording played. "Kendrick family is high class. You are too plain to sit with them. Just give Chelsea the $50,000 and stay out of sight. We need Kendrick to think she comes from money. Do not ruin this for her." I paused the recording. I had the bank records proving I funded her life. I had the proof that the $50,000 was my money, not stolen vendor funds. And I had the audio evidence proving my family intentionally hid me away to maintain a fake affluent aesthetic. The viral lie was about to meet the forensic truth, and the fallout was going to be catastrophic for the golden child. But having the evidence was only half the battle. In a court of law, a mountain of paper means absolutely nothing if it is not presented as a clear, irrefutable narrative. I was not going to stoop to Chelsea level by filming myself crying in a messy bedroom. I was not going to write a long emotional paragraph begging strangers on the internet to believe me. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to present a complete financial audit. For the next 6 hours, my apartment transformed into a war room. I opened a professional video editing software, treating the digital timeline exactly like a financial ledger. I am a forensic accountant. We do not panic when the situation gets complicated. We simply isolate the variables and follow the money. First, I needed to completely dismantle the illusion of her wealth. I opened Chelsea public Instagram profile on one monitor and my compiled bank statements on the other. I started matching the dates, creating a chronological map of her lies. On October 12th of last year, Chelsea posted a picture of a brand new Chanel handbag sitting on a marble counter with the caption, "Spoiling myself after a massive brand deal, feeling blessed." I dragged that screenshot directly into my video editor. Right next to it, I placed a scan of my own credit card statement from October 11th, showing a charge for $4,500 at the Chanel boutique. I overlaid a frantic text message from Chelsea that same morning, begging me to buy it for her so she would not look poor at an exclusive influencer networking event. I did this for every single aspect of her fake lifestyle. I matched her aesthetic luxury apartment tours to the bright pink eviction notices I had paid off to keep her from ending up on the street. I matched her glamorous tropical vacation posts to the high-interest personal loans my parents forced me to take out to cover their own mortgage because they had given all their retirement cash to Chelsea. I exported 5 years of text message logs between myself, my sister, and my parents. I did not just scroll through them on my phone screen. I extracted the raw data files straight from the carrier to prove they were not fabricated, highlighted the most damning exchanges in bright yellow, and stitched them into the video. Messages from Chelsea, reading, Sydney, if you do not pay my rent this month, Kendrick is going to find out I am actually broke and he will leave me. You have to help me. You owe me as my sister. And messages from my father saying, stop being so selfish with your salary. Your sister is trying to build a brand and you are dragging her down. Pay her credit card bill today, or do not bother coming to Thanksgiving. I stitched them all together into a rapid-fire, undeniable sequence. The extreme contrast between her public persona as a wealthy influencer and her private reality of constantly begging me for cash was absolutely pathetic. But the undisputed centerpiece of my defense was the voicemail. I imported the audio file of my mother Brenda leaving that horrific message just 2 weeks before the wedding. I ran the audio through a professional vocal enhancer to remove any background static or interference. I wanted her cruel, calculating tone to be crystal clear. I placed the audio over a stark black screen, typing out every single word in bold white subtitles so nobody could possibly misinterpret what was being said. Listen to me carefully, Sydney. The audio played my mother voice dripping with venom. Kendrick family is high class. You are too plain to sit with them. Just give Chelsea the $50,000 and stay out of sight. We need Kendrick to think she comes from money. Do not ruin this for her. As her voice demanded the money, I flashed the high-resolution scan of the cashier check on the screen. I added a thick red circle around my name, printed clearly on the remitter line, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the money Chelsea claimed was stolen from her wedding vendor fund was actually my own personal life savings. I then added the bank withdrawal slip, showing the money leaving my account, followed by the text from Chelsea, acknowledging that she needed my money to secure her place in Kendrick family. I watched the final edit from start to finish. It was exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds long. It contained 0 tears, 0 raised voices, and 0 psychological manipulation. It was a cold, hard, factual dismantling of a completely fraudulent existence. It proved that I was the sole financial provider for a family that utterly despised me. It proved that Chelsea was a chronic liar who used the severe accusation of racism as a weapon to cover up her own financial crimes. My phone was still buzzing relentlessly on my desk. My notifications were a literal war zone of death threats, insults, and calls for my immediate arrest. My former colleagues were blocking me on professional networking sites. The internet had tried, convicted, and sentenced me in less than 12 hours based entirely on the word of a crying woman in a sweater. I exported the video file in the highest possible resolution, ensuring every bank statement and text message was perfectly legible. I opened my social media accounts, the ones that were currently being flooded with intense hatred from millions of strangers. I did not write a long defensive caption. I simply typed, "The audit of Chelsea wedding," and attached the video file. I took a deep breath, feeling my pulse steady in my chest, and hit publish across every single platform. I closed my laptop, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a glass of cold water. The trap was set, the evidence was public, and the internet was about to experience a massive reckoning. I stood in my kitchen watching the cold water condense on the outside of my glass. I left my laptop open on the kitchen island, the screen glowing with real-time analytics. In the first 10 minutes, my video had only a few hundred views. People who came to my page to leave hateful comments were clicking on it, expecting a tearful apology or a frantic excuse. Instead, they were met with a high-definition, irrefutable financial audit. The shift happened faster than I could have ever predicted. The internet is a highly reactive place, but if there is one thing social media users love more than a villain, it is the dramatic exposure of a liar. By hour 2, the view count crossed 500,000. The comment section, which had previously been a cesspool of death threats directed at me, completely flipped. Users were tagging Chelsea, demanding explanations for the bank transfers I had shown. True crime content creators and internet detectives began breaking down my video frame by frame, analyzing the timestamps on the text messages and the routing numbers on the eviction notices. They zoomed in on the red circle around my name on the cashier check. The narrative shifted instantly and violently. I was no longer the bitter, jealous spinster who ruined a wedding. I was the financially abused sibling who had finally snapped and brought the receipts. The professional ramifications for Chelsea began almost immediately. She had spent 2 years carefully cultivating a micro-influencer image. She had active sponsorships with a mid-tier makeup brand, a popular activewear company, and a boutique meal kit delivery service. Within 4 hours of my video going viral, the public pressure on these companies became immense. Users flooded their corporate pages linking the audio of my mother discriminatory voicemail and demanding to know if these brands financially supported fraud and racism. The corporate response was swift, merciless, and completely public. I watched in real time as the activewear brand posted a statement on their main page severing ties with Chelsea and explicitly stating they did not condone her actions or the discriminatory environment fostered by her family. The makeup brand followed suit shortly after pulling her discount codes from their website. Chelsea follower count began to plummet by the thousands. She tried to stem the bleeding by turning off her comments, but that only made her look guiltier. Then, in a final act of digital desperation, she made her account private, effectively locking herself in a cage of her own making. The 60-second performance she thought would destroy my life had just permanently dismantled her own. Even my accounting firm took notice. My phone buzzed with an email notification from the senior managing partner who had suspended me just hours earlier. The email was short and backpedaled significantly, stating that HR was reviewing the new evidence and that my unpaid leave status was currently being reconsidered. I closed the email without replying. They had thrown me under the bus without a second thought, and I would deal with them later. Right now, I had bigger things to focus on. While I was watching Chelsea influencer career turn into absolute ash, I knew the social media victory was only the first phase. The real danger was not a mob of angry teenagers on the internet. The real danger was the man she had just married. Kendrick was a senior partner at a prestigious corporate law firm in Atlanta. He was a man who traded in reputation, leverage, and immense power. He came from a prominent Black family that valued discretion and absolute perfection above all else. And thanks to Chelsea's reckless vanity, his brand new marriage was currently the top trending topic on every major social media platform for all the wrong reasons. I knew it was only a matter of time before the video crossed his desk. Kendrick did not casually browse social media, but the associates at his law firm definitely did. It was easy to picture the scene playing out downtown. A junior lawyer hesitating outside his glass office, eventually walking in to show him the viral video of his new wife being exposed as a broke, manipulative fraud. I knew Kendrick would not react with sadness or heartbreak. He would react with the cold, calculated fury of a man who had been conned into a legally binding contract. At 6:00 that evening, the heavy silence of my apartment was broken by 3 sharp, authoritative knocks on my front door. It was not a casual visitor. It was the confident knock of someone who demanded immediate entry. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing in the brightly lit hallway, looking immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit but radiating absolute rage, was my new brother-in-law. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Kendrick stood there holding a thick leather briefcase. He did not look at me with the warm, brotherly affection he had displayed during the wedding rehearsals. He looked at me as if I were a hostile witness on the stand who was about to be obliterated. His jaw was tight and his eyes were dark and calculating. He had definitely seen the video. He had heard the voicemail where my mother admitted to using my money to trick his elite family. And now he was standing on my doorstep ready to deploy the full weight of his legal expertise to control the damage. "May I come in, Sydney?" Kendrick asked. His voice was low, perfectly controlled, and entirely devoid of any pleasantries. "We have a very serious legal matter to discuss, and it is in your absolute best interest to cooperate with me right now." I stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. I was not intimidated by his tailored suit or his courtroom tone. My entire career was built on facing down angry, powerful executives who realized their financial secrets were out in the open. Kendrick walked into my living room, his presence instantly dominating the small space. He set his briefcase on my coffee table and unclasped the brass locks with a sharp snap. He was preparing for a war, assuming I was the enemy who needed to be crushed and silenced to salvage his family reputation. He had absolutely no idea that I was the only person holding the map to his wife's actual crimes. I closed the front door behind him, making sure the lock clicked firmly into place. Kendrick did not waste time looking around my apartment or making polite small talk. He walked straight into my kitchen, set his leather briefcase on the granite island, and unclasped the brass locks with a sharp snap. He reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. He slapped the stack onto the counter with a resounding thud. "I am not here to play family counselor." Sidney Kendrick began, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am here as legal counsel for my wife and to protect the integrity of my family name. What you posted online today constitutes malicious defamation, tortious interference, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. This is a formal cease and desist order. You have exactly 1 hour to delete that video across all platforms and issue a public retraction drafted by my firm, or I will personally sue you into absolute bankruptcy." I looked at the documents, then up at his face. He was not bluffing. As a corporate litigator, he destroyed people for a living, and right now he had me locked in his sights. "You will lose your license as a certified accountant?" Kendrick continued, leaning forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. "I will subpoena your firm. I will make sure the legal fees alone drain every single cent you have left to your name." Chelsea is completely distraught. She told me everything about your lifelong jealousy, and honestly, I am appalled. Trying to steal her trust fund payout just to humiliate her on her wedding day is a new low even for someone as bitter as you. I blinked. The room suddenly felt very still. I processed his words carefully, letting them echo in my mind. "Her trust fund payout," I repeated slowly, making absolutely sure I had heard him correctly. Kendrick stood up straighter, adjusting his expensive tie. "Do not play stupid with me, Sydney. Chelsea explained exactly why you had that $50,000 check in your possession. She told me about the family trust your grandfather left her, the one you were managing, because of your accounting background. She told me you refused to disperse her rightful inheritance because you were furious that she was marrying into my wealthy family while you were still single. She told me you threatened to sabotage the wedding vendors if she did not comply with your ridiculous demands." I stared at him in complete and utter silence. The sheer magnitude of Chelsea lies was absolutely breathtaking. She had not just lied about a single bounced check or a stolen wedding fund. She had fabricated an entire financial history. She had convinced this brilliant, highly educated corporate lawyer that our decidedly middle-class, financially illiterate parents possessed generational wealth. She had invented a phantom trust fund to explain away the $50,000 she was desperately trying to extract from me. Kendrick did not know about the eviction notices. He did not know about her sub-500 credit score. He genuinely believed he had married a woman of equal financial standing, a woman who was currently being victimized by her bitter, jealous accountant sister. Suddenly, my anger toward Kendrick completely evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of pity. He was a ruthless corporate shark in the courtroom, but in his personal life, he was nothing more than an oblivious mark. He had been masterfully conned by a woman who rented her designer wardrobe and begged her little sister for grocery money. I looked down at the cease and desist letter sitting on my counter. The legal jargon was intimidating, designed to force immediate compliance through sheer terror. I picked up a black pen that was resting nearby, twirled it in my fingers for a second, and then tossed it directly into the trash can. I am not signing that, I said calmly. And I am certainly not deleting the video. Kendrick's jaw clenched hard. His professional veneer cracked for a fraction of a second, revealing genuine explosive fury. I am warning you, Sydney. You do not want to go to war with me. My firm will completely obliterate you. Kendrick. I replied, keeping my voice completely level and devoid of any emotion. You are an exceptional lawyer. Your reputation in Atlanta is legendary. You know how to read complex contracts, you know how to depose hostile witnesses, and you know how to spot a corporate liability from a mile away. But you are a terrible judge of character when it comes to the woman you just married. He opened his mouth to interrupt me, but I held up my hand to stop him. You came here to threaten me because you believe I am illegally withholding a family trust fund. I continued stepping around the kitchen island, so there was nothing between us. You believe my parents are wealthy. You believe Chelsea is a financially independent woman who just happened to fall victim to a jealous sibling. But as a lawyer, you know that hearsay is completely inadmissible. You require hard evidence. You require discovery and exhibits. Kendrick narrowed his eyes, clearly suspicious of my completely calm demeanor. What exactly is your point? My point is that you are currently defending a phantom, I said, gesturing toward the hallway leading to my home office. You threaten to ruin my life because you think you have the facts. But you do not have them. Not even close. Before you spend thousands of dollars filing that lawsuit and putting your own professional reputation on the public record, I invite you to do a little legal discovery right now. I walked down the short hallway and stepped into my office. My custom-built desktop computer was still humming, the dual monitors glowing brightly in the dim room. I heard Kendrick hesitate in the living room for a long moment before his heavy footsteps finally followed me down the hall. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders practically filling the frame, eyeing my workstation with intense suspicion. I pulled out the leather desk chair and gestured for him to sit. He did not move an inch. If you are so incredibly confident that your new wife is telling the truth, I challenged him, then you should have absolutely no problem looking at the raw financial data. No edited social media videos, no internet narratives, just raw, verifiable banking records, credit reports, and tax returns. The exact same documents a judge would demand during discovery. Sit down, Kendrick. Let me introduce you to the real Chelsea. Kendrick stared at me for a long, tense moment. He was a man who prided himself on his intellect and his absolute control over any given situation. The idea that he might have been fundamentally deceived was clearly warring with his fierce loyalty to his new wife. Slowly, he walked into the office, pulled back the chair, and sat down in front of my monitors. I reached over, tapped the keyboard to wake the screens, and prepared to systematically destroy his entire marriage with nothing but mathematics. I pulled up the official public records portal for the state. My fingers moved rapidly across the mechanical keyboard, a sound I found incredibly comforting in the tense silence of the room. I typed in my grandfather's name and pulled the certified probate documents from the county courthouse. I dragged the PDF onto the large monitor directly in front of Kendrick. His dark eyes instantly locked onto the screen, scanning the legal text with the speed and precision of a seasoned litigator. Kendrick, I said quietly, pointing to the final page of the filing. This is the legal declaration of my grandfather's estate at the time of his passing. He was a wonderful man, but he was a mechanic, not a millionaire. He left exactly $12,000 in life insurance, which went entirely to covering his funeral expenses and a small outstanding medical bill. There is no generational wealth. There is no secret family trust fund. Chelsea fabricated that entire story from thin air to explain away why she was desperately trying to extract a $50,000 cashier check from me. Kendrick stared at the glowing white screen. His trained legal mind searched for a loophole, a mistake, or any sign of clerical error. But he found nothing. It was an irrefutable certified copy from the state. He let out a slow, shallow breath, resting his hands heavily on the edge of my desk. He did not say a word, but the rigid posture of his shoulders began to drop. I did not give him time to process or attempt to rationalize her lie. In forensic accounting, you hit the subject with the data consecutively so they cannot build a false narrative in between the facts. I opened a new tab and logged into a secure consumer credit monitoring portal. Because I had been forced to act as the primary guarantor on Chelsea luxury apartment lease 2 years ago, just to keep her from being evicted, I still retained authorized legal access to her full credit profile. I entered her social security number from memory and clicked the button to generate a fresh, real-time report. The page loaded instantly. Right in the center of the screen, a massive bright red graphic displayed her current FICO score, 480. Kendrick physically recoiled from the monitor as if he had just been struck in the chest. As a man whose entire life and career were governed by financial discipline, strict corporate contracts, and elite social standing, seeing a credit score that abysmal was like looking at a horrific crime scene. I scrolled down past the executive summary and into the individual trade lines. It was a complete financial bloodbath. There were 22 open credit card accounts. Bright yellow warning icons flagged over half of them for severe delinquency. She had retail store cards, high-interest personal loans, and maxed-out revolving lines of credit. Several accounts had already been sold to aggressive third-party collection agencies. I highlighted the total outstanding balance at the very bottom of the column. $150,000 in unsecured toxic debt. Kendrick rubbed his face with both hands, pressing the heels of his palms into his eyes. His voice, which had been so commanding and threatening just 15 minutes ago, sounded completely hollow. "This cannot be right," he muttered, shaking his head in a desperate final attempt to reject reality. "Sydney, she gave me a vintage Cartier watch on the morning of our wedding. It is a highly sought-after reference model. It costs at least $30,000 on the secondary market. A woman with a 480 credit score cannot walk into a luxury dealer and purchase that timepiece." I nodded calmly, completely unfazed by his pushback. "You are absolutely right, Kendrick. She cannot purchase it, but she can rent it." I opened the master spreadsheet where I had compiled my audit. Last year, when my parents begged me to help Chelsea organize her taxes, because she was terrified of being audited by the IRS, demanded full access to her email accounts to track her digital receipts. I had archived everything to protect myself. I opened a saved PDF document and dragged it onto the main monitor. It was a digital contract from an elite luxury rental service based out of Miami. I pointed to the itemized invoice. It clearly listed the exact vintage Cartier watch he was currently wearing on his left wrist. The contract stipulated a rental fee of $800 a month with a strict return date required exactly 30 days after the wedding ceremony. I even showed him the insurance deposit clause which had been charged to my mother credit card because Chelsea-owned cards were universally declined. Kendrick slowly lifted his left arm and stared at the heavy gold watch resting against his immaculate French cuff. The symbol of his new wife, eternal devotion, and supposed wealth was actually a short-term rented liability. He looked physically sick to his stomach. The color had completely drained from his face. But I was not finished. He needed to see the full, terrifying scope of the illusion he had married. "And her wedding dress?" I continued, my voice remaining steady and rigidly professional. "You told me earlier today that her family paid for her custom-imported gown. Let us look at the actual financial reality of that dress." I clicked back to the live credit report and highlighted 3 specific accounts that had been opened exactly 6 weeks ago. Chelsea applied for 3 different subprime credit cards on the exact same afternoon, targeting lenders known for approving high-risk borrowers. She maxed out all 3 of them within 48 hours of approval. The vendor names on the charges matched the upscale bridal boutique perfectly. $5,000 on the first card, $4,000 on the second, $3,000 on the third. Your wife walked down the aisle to marry you in a dress funded by predatory lenders, charging 29% interest, I said simply. Everything about her lifestyle is a carefully constructed mirage. The silence in my home office was absolutely suffocating. The gentle hum of my computer cooling fans was the only sound in the room. I watched Kendrick systematically process the absolute destruction of his entire marriage. He was a man who required an ironclad prenuptial agreement specifically to protect his generational family assets from gold diggers. He had vetted her, or at least he thought he had. But Chelsea had used my bank accounts, my clean credit history, and my hard-earned cash as a financial human shield to successfully pass his family rigorous background checks. She had presented herself to his elite relatives as an independent, wealthy influencer. In reality, she was a financial black hole holding a match over his pristine reputation. Kendrick leaned back in the leather desk chair and let out a long, ragged exhale. The intimidating corporate shark who had boldly threatened to sue me into bankruptcy was completely gone. In his place sat a devastated, deeply humiliated man who realized he had been played for an absolute fool by a woman desperate for status. The illusion of the golden child was permanently shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Every designer bag, every lavish vacation post, every thoughtful luxury gift she had ever given him was a calculated lie funded by crippling debt and family manipulation. I quietly closed the tabs on my browser. I did not need to demand an apology or say I told you so. The numbers had already screamed the truth far louder than I ever could. Kendrick sat frozen in the leather chair, his eyes locked onto the dual monitors. The silence in my home office was thick, heavy with the suffocating weight of a shattered marriage that was barely 24 hours old. As a man born into Atlanta elite black society, his entire life was meticulously curated and heavily scrutinized. He belonged to exclusive country clubs, sat on the boards of prestigious philanthropic charities, and was perfectly positioned to make senior partner at his law firm by the end of the fiscal year. His family name was completely synonymous with integrity, generational wealth, and flawless public presentation. Now he was legally tethered to a woman who committed rampant financial fraud just to buy her wedding dress. Kendrick finally found his voice, though it was a hoarse, unrecognizable rasp that sounded completely foreign to the intimidating lawyer who had stormed into my apartment. The prenuptial agreement, he whispered, almost talking to himself, as his trained legal mind began to dissect the catastrophe. The prenup was completely ironclad. My family attorneys drafted it to ensure absolute transparency and to protect our legacy assets. There is a strict moral turpitude clause and a mandatory full financial disclosure requirement. She signed a sworn affidavit in front of a notary stating she had zero unsecured debt and a healthy trust fund. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with the horrifying realization of the legal and social implications. By lying on that affidavit, she did not just deceive me personally, Sydney. She committed blatant perjury. She defrauded a legally binding contract. If my firm finds out about this, if my father discovers that I brought a massive financial and public relations liability into our family, I will be an absolute laughingstock. I could lose my seat on the board. My entire reputation is built on risk assessment, and I married a walking liability. I watched the ruthless corporate litigator slowly rebuild his armor. The initial shock and profound humiliation morphed rapidly into a cold, terrifying legal fury. The vulnerable man was gone, replaced entirely by the shark. He stood up from my desk chair, his movements sharp, precise, and calculated. He did not bother to apologize for threatening me with a lawsuit earlier. He did not need to. We both knew the war he was about to wage was no longer against me. I was just the expert witness who had handed him the smoking gun. "I am leaving now," Kendrick stated, walking briskly out of the office and grabbing his leather briefcase from the kitchen island with such force that his knuckles turned completely white. "I am going straight back to the hotel suite. I am going to pack my bags, and then I am calling my senior partners and my personal attorney. This marriage is completely over before it even officially began." I will be filing for an immediate annulment based on extreme financial fraud identity, misrepresentation, and breach of contract. She will not get a single cent from me. He walked over to my front door, paused with his hand heavily resting on the brass knob, and looked back at me over his shoulder. "Thank you, Sydney," he said, his voice completely devoid of warmth, but laced with genuine professional respect. "You just saved me from making the biggest financial mistake of my entire life. I will handle Chelsea from here." He opened the heavy door and walked out into the brightly lit hallway, letting it slam shut behind him. The resounding thud echoed through my quiet apartment, signaling the definitive end of my sister's reign of terror. I stood completely alone in my living room, letting out a long, shuddering breath that I felt like I had been holding for 20 years. A profound, overwhelming sense of triumph washed over my entire body. For my whole life, my parents and my sister had treated me like a disposable asset. They had used me emotionally, gaslit me, drained my bank accounts, and tried to publicly destroy my professional reputation when I finally refused to comply. But in the end, my meticulous documentation and my refusal to break under pressure had been my ultimate shield. Chelsea was about to face the terrifying wrath of a deeply humiliated corporate lawyer, and my parents were about to realize their golden child was nothing but an expensive, fraudulent liability. I walked into the kitchen, picked up a clean glass from the cabinet, and poured myself some cold water, feeling lighter and more fiercely independent than I ever had. The battle was finally over. I had won my freedom. The toxic cord was permanently cut, or so I thought. I set my glass on the granite counter as my phone screen suddenly lit up with a bright notification. A sharp, urgent chime pierced the peaceful quiet of my apartment. I casually picked up the device, fully expecting an email from my accounting firm, or perhaps another text from a supportive friend asking about the viral video fallout. Instead, it was an automated push notification from Equifax, the premium credit monitoring service I used to keep a strict eye on my financial identity. The message was displayed in bold, glaringly bright letters across my lock screen. "Congratulations on your $50,000 personal loan from Chase Bank. Your funds have been successfully dispersed and are ready for use." I froze completely. The glass of water slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, shattering loudly against the hardwood floor and sending cold water splashing across my bare feet. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle. I just stared at the glowing digital screen, my heart suddenly slamming violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had not applied for a personal loan. I had not walked into a bank branch. I had not signed any financial paperwork, and I had certainly not authorized any hard credit inquiries. As a forensic accountant, my credit was perfectly locked down and monitored daily. But as I stared at the horrifying notification, a sickening, terrifying realization dawned on my mind with crystal clarity. Chelsea had desperately needed exactly $50,000 to cover her bounced wedding checks before the country club filed police reports on Monday morning. And my parents, who had kept a physical copy of my original birth certificate and my social security number locked inside their home safe since I was a child, had been backed into a desperate, frantic corner by my refusal to hand over my savings. They knew all of my personal details. They knew my maiden name, my previous addresses, and my exact date of birth. The battle was not over. My family had not surrendered. They had simply bypassed my boundaries and escalated the situation into a severe federal crime. I was no longer dealing with toxic relatives trying to protect their aesthetic image. I was dealing with desperate criminals who had just stolen my entire financial identity to fund a fake lifestyle. As the initial wave of shock began to wear off, the forensic accountant in me took over once again, replacing my panic with absolute razor-sharp focus. I stepped carefully over the broken glass on the kitchen floor, walked straight back into my home office, and sat down at my computer. It was time to hunt them down. I opened a secure browser window and bypassed my usual network settings to log directly into my credit monitoring portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in my credentials with mechanical precision. I clicked on the glaring red alert. A $50,000 unsecured personal loan had been applied for, approved, and fully funded through Chase Bank, within the last 12 hours. The speed of the approval made perfect sense. My credit score was a pristine 815. I had zero debt, a high income, and a flawless payment history. Banks love customers like me, and unfortunately, identity thieves do too. I pulled the digital copy of the loan application from the bank portal. Whoever filled it out had not just guessed my basic information. They had my exact social security number, my current employment details, my gross annual income, and the specific answers to my private security questions. They knew the make of my first car and the street I lived on in third grade. They even had the routing number for an old dormant checking account I had opened years ago and completely forgotten about. I stared at the glowing screen, piecing the puzzle together with sickening clarity. When I was 19, my parents insisted on keeping my original birth certificate and my social security card locked in their heavy steel safe in the basement. They claimed it was for my own protection, to prevent me from losing them in my college dorm. Even after I graduated and moved into my own apartment, Brenda always found an excuse to hold on to the physical documents. She would say things like, "I have them perfectly organized here, there is no need to move them." I never pushed the issue because I had memorized the numbers and rarely needed the paper copies. Now that toxic need for parental control had mutated into full-blown criminal fraud. Applying for a massive loan online leaves a permanent digital footprint, and my parents were not sophisticated hackers. They were desperate, panicking people trying to save their golden child from going to prison. I scrolled down to the bottom of the digital application to view the metadata. The application was submitted at 7:45 on Sunday morning. That was exactly 1 hour after the luxury venue manager had likely called Chelsea to inform her that her wedding checks had bounced. I looked at the IP address logged by the bank security system. I copied the sequence of numbers, opened a network tracking tool, and ran a reverse geolocation search. The loading bar flashed across the screen for 3 seconds before dropping a bright red pin on a digital map. The pin landed exactly on the coordinates of my parents' suburban house. They had sat at their kitchen table, probably drinking their morning coffee, and systematically stolen my identity. But the loan application was only the first half of the crime. I needed to see exactly where the money went. I logged into the dormant checking account they had used as the deposit destination. The ledger showed a massive $50,000 credit pending from Chase Bank. Immediately below it, time-stamped just 20 minutes later, was an outgoing wire transfer for the exact same amount. The destination account belonged to a local branch of Bank of America. I recognized the last 4 digits instantly. It was Chelsea's primary checking account. The exact same account she had used for years to beg me for rent money and car payments. The sheer audacity of it left me completely breathless. They had stolen my identity, secured a massive loan using my pristine credit, and wired the funds directly to the woman who was simultaneously trying to destroy my life on the internet. They thought they could get away with it because I was family. They assumed I would just absorb the massive financial debt the exact same way I had absorbed every other emotional and financial blow they had dealt me over the past decade. They expected me to cry, complain, and eventually set up a monthly payment plan to protect them from the law. They thought the social pressure of keeping the family intact would force me into silent compliance. But they had fundamentally misunderstood the line they had just crossed. Toxic behavior is playing favorites. Toxic behavior is leaving a cruel voicemail, or insulting my career, or handing your daughter a limited access guest badge at a wedding. But stealing a social security number to take out a $50,000 loan is not family drama. It is felony identity theft. Wiring those fraudulently obtained funds across state or bank lines is not a simple mistake or a desperate favor. It is federal wire fraud. These were aggressive, premeditated crimes that carried mandatory minimum prison sentences in the federal system. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the digital map still glowing brightly on my monitor. The betrayal was absolute, severing whatever tiny, fragile thread of familial loyalty I had left. Any lingering guilt I might have felt about exposing Chelsea to Kendrick completely evaporated in that exact moment. My parents had actively chosen to sacrifice my financial future, my credit score, and my peace of mind to save a chronic liar from the consequences of her own actions. They had proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that they viewed me as nothing more than an exploitable resource to be drained whenever Chelsea needed a bailout. I picked up my phone from the desk. I did not call my mother to scream at her. I did not call my father to demand an explanation or a tearful apology. Confronting them now would be an emotional reaction, and giving them a warning would only give them precious time to attempt to cover their tracks, move the money again, or concoct a new lie. I was done reacting emotionally to their abuse. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop. I began taking high-resolution screenshots of the IP address logs, the wire transfer receipts, and the fraudulent loan application. I compiled a fresh, highly secured dossier of evidence. This was no longer a petty family dispute about a wedding invitation. It was an active criminal investigation, and I was about to build a completely bulletproof case against my own parents. I opened a new spreadsheet treating my own stolen identity exactly like a high-stakes corporate embezzlement case. When you are dealing with financial crimes, the prosecution does not care about family dynamics, emotional trauma, or who is considered the golden child. They care about the paper trail. I started by isolating the exact timestamp of the Chase Bank loan approval. The funds hit the dormant checking account at exactly 8:15 on Sunday morning. I documented the specific routing number of the destination account. It was the exact same Bank of America account Chelsea had used for years to receive the rent money and car payments I had been forced to cover. But simply knowing where the money went was not enough for a conviction. I needed to prove that Chelsea actually received and used that exact money, tying the identity theft directly to her bounced wedding checks to establish a clear motive. Using my retained access to her credit profile and the banking portals I had saved from doing her taxes the previous year, I dug deeper into the transaction history. I could not view her live Bank of America ledger without triggering a security alert, but I did not need to. I had the wire transfer confirmation number from my end. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the federal wire trace details. It showed the $50,000 leaving my fraudulent account and successfully clearing into her account by 9 in the morning. Then I cross-referenced this exact amount with the luxury country club vendor invoices I had helped her organize weeks ago. The math was utterly flawless. She had written bad checks totaling $48,500. The fraudulent loan covered the debt perfectly, leaving exactly $1,500 for her honeymoon expenses. I compiled the digital footprints, the IP addresses linking the loan application to my parents' suburban house, the exact timestamps of the wire transfers, and the corresponding vendor invoices. But digital evidence is easily dismissed by people who do not truly understand it, so I translated everything into a highly tangible, undeniable format. I printed every single document on high-quality paper. I used bright color-coded tabs to separate the distinct phases of the crime. Red for the initial identity theft and the fraudulent loan application. Yellow for the IP address, geolocation, and network tracking. Green for the wire transfer and the specific routing numbers. Blue for Chelsea unpaid vendor invoices and the country club correspondence. I placed it all inside a heavy professional black binder. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. My parents thought they could easily outsmart the banking system just because they had memorized my social security number. They did not realize they had left a massive glowing highway of digital evidence pointing directly to their own guilt. With the binder fully assembled, I did not call emergency services. A patrol officer responding to a domestic dispute would have absolutely no idea how to handle interstate financial fraud. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the local police department Financial Crimes Division. I requested to speak directly with an economic crimes detective. I calmly explained that I was a certified forensic accountant, officially reporting a $50,000 identity theft and wire fraud case, and that I had a fully compiled evidentiary dossier ready for immediate handover. They told me to come down to the precinct right away. But I did not stop there. Wire fraud often falls under federal jurisdiction, especially when electronic bank transfers utilize federal banking systems to move stolen funds. I navigated to the official United States Postal Inspection Service website. Postal inspectors are some of the most ruthless, thorough, and highly effective federal agents in the entire country when it comes to investigating financial crimes and identity theft. I filed an official, highly detailed report online attaching the encrypted digital version of my dossier directly to the submission portal. I drove to the police precinct in the early afternoon. The station lobby was loud and chaotic, filled with frustrated people reporting stolen cars and minor property disputes. I waited patiently on a hard wooden bench until a detective named Miller called me back to his quiet glass-walled office. He looked exhausted, holding a cheap paper cup of coffee, likely expecting another messy, convoluted family dispute involving shared credit cards or a misunderstood verbal agreement. "Take a seat," Sydney Detective Miller said, opening a blank yellow notepad on his desk. "Tell me exactly what happened." I did not tell him a long, emotional story. I slid the thick, color-coded black binder across his desk. I opened it directly to the executive summary page I had drafted. At 7:45 yesterday morning, I stated my voice completely level and rigidly professional. My parents, Thomas and Brenda, committed felony identity theft by using my social security number to apply for a $50,000 personal loan from Chase Bank. The IP address confirms the application originated directly from their residential internet network. At 8:35, they committed wire fraud by transferring those fraudulently obtained funds to my sister Chelsea to cover insufficient funds on several luxury wedding vendor contracts. Every IP log routing number and transaction receipt is tabbed and highlighted in that binder. Detective Miller set his coffee cup down slowly. He looked at me, then down at the binder. He opened the heavy black cover and slowly flipped through the red, yellow, green, and blue sections. I watched his eyes widen as he traced the immaculate, undeniable flow of financial data. He looked at the bank routing numbers, the geolocation map, and the clear chronological timeline. Law enforcement officers typically spend weeks or even months trying to subpoena this exact kind of information from uncooperative banks and internet service providers. I had just handed him a fully prosecuted federal case tied up with a neat little bow. "You are a forensic accountant?" he asked, looking back up at me with a newfound expression of deep professional respect. "Yes," I replied without blinking, "and I am pressing full criminal charges against all three of them. I want the loan officially flagged as fraudulent, and I want the people who stole my identity held fully accountable under the law." Miller closed the binder and rested his hands flat on top of it. He leaned forward, his entire demeanor shifting from exhausted skepticism to sharp professional focus. Usually, financial cases involving family members get incredibly messy because the victim eventually backs out, feels guilty, or refuses to testify in court, he warned me quietly. "If we move forward with this, especially with the federal wire fraud implications, your parents could be facing serious prison time. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with these charges?" I thought about the limited access guest badge pinned to my dress. I thought about the cruel voicemail from my mother, the viral video Chelsea posted trying to destroy my career with false accusations of racism, and the casual, remorseless way they had stolen my financial identity to fund a lie. They had burned the bridge to absolute ashes and then tried to sell the dirt underneath it. "I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life," I told him, my voice colder than ice. "Proceed with the arrests." Detective Miller nodded slowly, absorbing the absolute finality in my voice. He closed the heavy black binder and pulled a formal incident report form from his desk drawer. The gears of the criminal justice system are notoriously slow, especially when coordinating between local financial crimes divisions and federal postal inspectors. But my meticulously organized dossier provided them with an undeniable roadmap. For the next 3 weeks, I continued my life in absolute silence. I went back to work at my accounting firm, which had miraculously reinstated me with a formal apology once the internet tide had turned so violently against my sister. I ignored the lingering stares from my colleagues and buried myself in my corporate cases. I did not text my mother. I did not check Chelsea private social media accounts. I simply waited for the trap to spring. Then on the Tuesday morning, right before the Thanksgiving holiday, my phone vibrated loudly on my desk. The caller identification displayed my mother name. I let it ring 3 times carefully, starting my automatic recording application before answering the call. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat and devoid of any emotion. "Sydney, darling," Brenda chimed through the speaker. Her tone was sickeningly sweet, dripping with a manufactured warmth that immediately made my stomach turn. "I know things got a little bit heated around the wedding, but the holidays are here, and it is time to put the past behind us. We are family after all." I stared at my computer monitor, utterly fascinated by her pathological delusion. She had stolen my social security number, committed federal wire fraud, and burdened me with $50,000 of debt just 3 weeks prior. Yet here she was using pet names and talking about family unity, as if we had simply argued over a misplaced sweater. "Chelsea and Kendrick have officially moved into their new mansion?" Brenda continued, her voice swelling with unearned pride and arrogance. "Kendrick parents and his extended family are flying in from out of state for a massive Thanksgiving dinner this Thursday. Chelsea is hosting everyone, and she specifically asked if you would come. We really want you there, Sydney. It is a time for forgiveness and moving forward together." I remained perfectly silent for a moment, piecing the chessboard together in my mind. I knew exactly why Chelsea was hosting Kendrick wealthy relatives. She was desperately trying to solidify her position as the perfect affluent wife, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire world was already destroyed. But more importantly, I knew exactly why Kendrick was allowing this dinner to happen. Kendrick had not kicked her out onto the street immediately after our meeting in my apartment. As a brilliant corporate litigator, he knew that an abrupt, messy separation could compromise his ironclad prenuptial agreement. He was playing the long game. He was keeping Chelsea comfortable, letting her sign more fraudulent documents, make more recorded statements, and dig her grave deeper, while his own private investigators and financial forensic teams finalized the annulment paperwork. He was turning this Thanksgiving dinner into his own grand finale. And my parents, utterly blinded by their own greed and arrogance, honestly believed they had successfully gotten away with the $50,000 bank loan. They assumed my silence over the past 3 weeks meant submission. They thought I had accepted the massive debt to keep the peace. "That sounds lovely," I replied, forcing my voice to sound hesitant but ultimately compliant. "I will be there. What time should I arrive?" "Oh, wonderful," Brenda exclaimed, clearly thrilled that her golden child aesthetic would have the perfect backdrop of a fully reunited family. "Dinner is at 5 o'clock sharp. Dress nicely, Sydney. Kendrick family is very formal and we want to make a good impression." I disconnected the call and immediately dialed a direct number I had saved in my contacts. Detective Miller answered on the second ring. "I just received my invitation to Thanksgiving dinner," I told him, matching his professional tone. "They will all be gathered at a single location in Buckhead this Thursday at 5 o'clock. Miller exhaled heavily into the receiver. "The federal warrants for Thomas and Brenda were officially signed by a judge this morning," he informed me. "The postal inspectors have been tracking the bank transfers and they are ready to move on the identity theft and wire fraud charges. We were planning to execute the arrest warrants at their suburban home on Friday morning. But having all the suspects localized at a single residence actually minimizes the flight risk and simplifies the logistics tremendously." "Are you entirely sure you want to be in the room when this goes down, Sydney? It is going to be incredibly chaotic." "I want to be sitting right at the table," I answered firmly, leaving no room for negotiation. "Coordinate your arrival for exactly 6 o'clock. That will give them enough time to sit down, serve the food, and feel completely untouchable before you knock on the door." Miller agreed to the precise timeline and promised to coordinate the strike team with the federal agents. He assured me the perimeter of the mansion would be quietly secured before anyone approached the front door. The trap was fully set and the steel jaws were ready to snap shut. I hung up the phone and spent the rest of my quiet Tuesday evening carefully selecting my outfit for the dinner. My mother had specifically requested that I dress nicely to impress Kendrick formal elite relatives. I walked into my closet and bypassed the bright colors and festive patterns. Instead, I chose a sleek, tailored black dress that looked remarkably like high-end funeral attire. It felt entirely appropriate for the dark occasion. I was not going to a family celebration. I was attending the absolute burial of their fraudulent empire, and I intended to look my absolute best while I watched them lose absolutely everything they had built. I pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates of the Buckhead Mansion precisely at 5 o'clock. The sprawling estate was a testament to Kendrick and his family genuine generational wealth, featuring perfectly manicured hedges, towering oak trees, and a sweeping circular driveway packed with luxury vehicles. I parked my reliable sedan between a gleaming black Range Rover and a silver Porsche, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath. The crisp November air felt bracing as I stepped out of the car, smoothing down the skirt of my tailored black dress. It was time to face the people who had stolen my identity. I walked up the wide stone steps and pressed the illuminated doorbell. A few seconds later, the heavy mahogany double doors swung open to reveal my sister. Chelsea looked absolutely radiant, playing the role of the perfect affluent hostess to absolute perfection. She wore a stunning emerald green silk dress that draped elegantly over her frame, and a massive diamond tennis bracelet sparkled on her wrist. I recognized the bracelet instantly from a luxury rental website I had audited during my investigation. Her smile was incredibly wide and painfully artificial as she leaned in to air kiss my cheek, a gesture so fake it almost made me laugh. "Sydney, you made it!" Chelsea chirped loudly, ensuring her voice carried into the grand foyer behind her. "We are so thrilled you decided to join us. Come inside, it is freezing out there." I stepped over the threshold into the massive two-story entryway. The mansion was breathtaking, filled with the warm, inviting scent of roasted turkey sage stuffing and expensive firewood burning in a massive stone hearth. The main living room was packed with people. Kendrick wealthy relatives were mingled throughout the space, dressed impeccably in tailored suits, cashmere sweaters, and elegant cocktail dresses. They exuded a quiet, effortless sophistication that my family had spent years desperately trying to mimic. In the center of the room, holding court near the fireplace, were my parents. Thomas was wearing a velvet smoking jacket that looked entirely ridiculous on him, laughing loudly while holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. Brenda stood right beside him, draped in a heavy pearl necklace, nodding thoughtfully as she conversed with an older woman wearing Chanel. They looked so comfortable, so incredibly secure in their stolen luxury. They had absolutely no idea that federal agents were currently staging in unmarked vehicles just 3 blocks away. I scanned the room and locked eyes with Kendrick. He was standing near the built-in bar, dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer. When he saw me, his expression remained completely neutral, but he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He had spent the last 3 weeks silently compiling his divorce and annulment paperwork while pretending to be the happy newlywed. We were both simply waiting for the clock to strike 6. I navigated through the crowded room, politely declining a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I kept my interactions brief and superficial, biding my time until the formal dinner was announced. At exactly 5:30, a catered staff member chimed a small silver bell, signaling that the food was ready to be served in the formal dining room. The guests began to slowly migrate down the wide hallway, the sound of polite chatter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I followed the crowd into a dining room that looked like it belonged in a high-end architectural magazine. A massive custom mahogany table stretched across the entire length of the room, set with gleaming silver cutlery, crystal wine glasses, and towering floral centerpieces. Place cards written in elegant calligraphy marked each seat. I began to walk toward the center of the table when a sharp, manicured hand suddenly grabbed my elbow. It was Brenda. Her smile was still plastered on her face for the benefit of the surrounding guests, but her eyes were cold, hard, and utterly venomous. She pulled me roughly toward the corner of the room, away from the grand table. "Where do you think you are going?" Brenda hissed in a low, furious whisper. "The main table is completely full, Sydney. It is reserved for Kendrick's immediate family, his law partners, and us. I set up a special place for you over here." She gestured toward the far corner of the room, right next to the swinging wooden doors leading into the busy kitchen. Sitting there, completely isolated from the rest of the elegant dining room, was a small, flimsy folding table covered with a cheap white linen cloth. It was the absolute ultimate insult. After stealing my identity, committing federal wire fraud in my name, and funding this entire fraudulent lifestyle with my pristine credit score, she still felt the pathological need to publicly humiliate me and put the family scapegoat back in her designated place. "You can eat here quietly," Brenda commanded, her grip tightening on my arm. "Do not make a scene. Do not speak to Kendrick father unless he speaks to you first. We have worked too hard to build a relationship with these people, and I will not let you ruin Chelsea's first holiday as a wife, just because you are bitter and single. Sit down and be grateful we even invited you." I looked at the pathetic little folding table, and then I looked directly into my mother's eyes. For 20 years, I would have swallowed my pride, lowered my head, and taken the seat in the corner just to avoid a public confrontation. But the woman she was trying to bully no longer existed. I was the financial executioner, and I was holding the blade. I gently but firmly pried her fingers off my elbow, smoothing out the sleeve of my black dress. "I do not think so." "Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, icy register, "I am not a child, and I am certainly not a second-class citizen in a house funded by my stolen identity. If you try to touch me again, I will loudly ask you to explain your recent Chase Bank loan application in front of the entire room." Brenda's face instantly drained of all color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The threat hit her like a physical blow, paralyzing her completely. She realized in that exact second that I knew everything, and the sheer terror in her eyes was absolutely intoxicating to witness. I turned my back on her and walked purposefully toward the grand mahogany table. I ignored the place cards completely. Kendrick's father, a highly respected retired federal judge named Carter, was already seated at the very head of the table. The chair directly to his right was designated for Chelsea, but I did not care. I walked right up to the heavy wooden chair, pulled it out, and sat down confidently, completely taking over the most powerful seat in the entire room. Judge Carter looked slightly surprised but smiled warmly at me. "You must be Sydney," he said in a deep, booming voice. "Kendrick has told me quite a bit about your work as a forensic accountant. It is a fascinating field." "It absolutely is, Judge Carter," I replied smoothly, picking up my crystal water glass. "You would be amazed at the things people try to hide and exactly how quickly the truth always comes to light." I glanced down to the other end of the room. Chelsea and Brenda were standing frozen near the folding table, staring at me in absolute horror. They knew they had lost all control. The lion den was entirely mine, and the federal agents were only minutes away. Brenda and Chelsea had absolutely no choice but to abandon their pathetic folding table scheme. With Judge Carter already engaging me in polite, sophisticated conversation at the head of the table, causing a public scene to forcibly move me would only humiliate them in front of the very people they were desperately trying to impress. Chelsea stiffly walked over and took the empty seat directly across from me. Her posture was completely rigid, her jaw clenched tight, and her eyes kept darting nervously toward Kendrick, trying to gauge his mood. Brenda and Thomas eventually took their designated seats further down the long mahogany table, but their previous arrogant swagger was entirely gone. It had been replaced by a tense, suffocating panic that radiated from them in waves. The catering staff moved efficiently around the massive room, pouring expensive vintage wines into crystal goblets and placing ornate platters of roasted autumn vegetables, artisanal breads, and cranberry compote across the table. The atmosphere among Kendrick relatives was joyful and relaxed, filled with the warm hum of holiday celebration. I maintained a pleasant, steady conversation with Judge Carter about corporate financial regulations and forensic auditing, savoring the exquisite taste of my chilled white wine while projecting an aura of absolute, unbothered confidence. I was completely in my element. The heavy kitchen doors swung open once again, and two uniformed servers carried out a massive, perfectly roasted turkey on a silver platter, setting it directly in front of Kendrick. He picked up the heavy silver carving knife and the long serving fork, preparing to portion the meal for his family. I knew this was my exact moment. I reached over and picked up my heavy silver soup spoon. I gently tapped the metal against the rim of my crystal water glass. The sharp, clear, ringing sound cut straight through the low hum of polite conversation, instantly drawing the attention of every single person in the dining room. Dozens of faces turned toward me, expecting a warm, traditional holiday sentiment from the sister of the bride. I stood up slowly from my high-backed chair, smoothing the front of my tailored black dress, and raised my wine glass with a completely steady hand. Thank you all for being here today. I began projecting my voice, so it echoed clearly off the high vaulted ceilings of the mansion. And thank you to Chelsea and Kendrick for opening up this beautiful new home to host such a magnificent gathering. It is truly a breathtaking property, and it certainly represents a very new chapter for this family. I paused for a brief second, letting the polite, expectant smiles form on the faces of Kendrick's wealthy relatives. Chelsea looked like she was about to be physically sick. Her knuckles were completely white as she gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table, her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. But I want to dedicate a very special toast to my parents, Thomas and Brenda. I continued shifting my gaze directly down the table to lock eyes with them. They have always gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure Chelsea happiness and to maintain a certain standard of living for her. In fact, their dedication to preserving her affluent image is so profound that just 3 weeks ago, on the morning immediately following the wedding, they executed a truly remarkable financial maneuver to protect my sister from going to jail. The dining room grew very quiet. The polite smiles began to falter and fade as the guests sensed the sharp, icy shift in my tone. Judge Carter leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes narrowing with sharp, analytical focus. I want to publicly thank my parents, I said, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying clarity, for digging into their basement safe, taking my private birth certificate, and stealing my social security number to fraudulently apply for a $50,000 personal loan from Chase Bank, entirely in my name. And I want to commend their sheer efficiency in committing federal wire fraud by transferring those stolen funds directly into Chelsea's checking account, just so she could cover the dozens of bad checks she wrote to her luxury wedding vendors hours before the police were called. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and completely deafening. Not a single person moved. The catering staff froze against the walls, holding pitchers of water in midair. Judge Carter slowly lowered his wine glass to the table, his expression morphing into a mask of deep judicial severity. The elite, wealthy relatives stared at my parents in pure, unadulterated shock, their mouths slightly parted in disbelief. Thomas' face turned a brilliant mottled shade of crimson. He aggressively pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly and violently against the hardwood floor. "Sydney, what on earth is wrong with you?" he stammered loudly, a forced, high-pitched laugh escaping his throat in a desperate attempt at damage control. "You have had way too much wine to drink. You are making absolutely no sense right now." Brenda quickly joined in, her voice trembling wildly as she frantically tried to weave a net of gaslighting over the stunned room. "She has just overworked everyone," Brenda pleaded, looking around frantically at Kendrick family members, her hands shaking so badly she knocked over her own water glass. "She has been under so much severe stress at her accounting firm lately. Sydney, sweetheart, you are acting completely crazy. We would never do something like that to you. It is just a massive misunderstanding about a shared bank account. Please sit down." But nobody was laughing with them. Nobody was buying the desperate, pathetic act. Chelsea sat frozen in her chair at the head of the table, all the blood completely draining from her face until she looked like a literal ghost. She did not try to defend our parents. She did not open her mouth to say a single word. She simply stared in absolute paralyzing terror at Kendrick. Her new husband was still standing at the head of the table, holding the silver carving knife in his right hand. He was completely silent and entirely composed, his face a mask of cold fury, simply watching the chaos unfold and waiting to deliver the final, devastating blow to the illusion she had built. Kendrick slowly placed the heavy silver carving knife down on the pristine white tablecloth. The metallic clink was the only sound in the suffocatingly quiet room. He reached up with steady hands and calmly unbuttoned his tailored charcoal suit jacket, slipping it off his shoulders and draping it over the back of his chair. He did not look at Chelsea. Instead, he reached down to his sleek leather briefcase resting on the floor beside him. He unclasped the brass locks with a sharp snap, pulled out a massive, heavily tabbed legal binder, and threw it directly onto the center of the grand mahogany table. It landed with a resounding, heavy thud that made the crystal wine glasses rattle and the silverware vibrate. Every single pair of eyes in the dining room snapped toward the thick stack of documents. Kendrick placed both hands flat on the edge of the table and looked directly at his father, Judge Carter, before scanning the faces of his elite, wealthy relatives. "I want to deeply apologize to my family," Kendrick began, his voice echoing with absolute authority and a cold, terrifying legal precision. "I pride myself on risk assessment and due diligence, but I allowed myself to be completely deceived by a masterclass in financial manipulation. Everything Sydney just told you is the absolute truth. And unfortunately, the fraudulent bank loan is only a fraction of the lies sitting at this table." Chelsea let out a choked, desperate sob. "Kendrick, please," she begged, her voice cracking as tears began to ruin her immaculate makeup. "Do not do this right now. We can talk about this in private. You forfeited the right to privacy when you committed perjury on a legally binding prenuptial agreement." Kendrick snapped back, his voice slicing through her tears like a scalpel. He looked back at his stunned family members. "The woman sitting across from you has absolutely no trust fund. She has no generational wealth. Her credit score is currently sitting at 480. She is drowning in over $150,000 of toxic unsecured credit card debt, much of which has already been sold to aggressive collection agencies." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Kendrick's sophisticated aunts and uncles exchanged horrified glances. In their world, financial insolvency was embarrassing, but active financial fraud was completely unforgivable. Kendrick did not stop there. He raised his left arm, pulling back his crisp white shirt cuff to expose the gleaming gold Cartier watch on his wrist. "She gave me this vintage timepiece on the morning of our wedding, as a symbol of her devotion and her supposed affluent background." He continued, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. "As it turns out, she rented it from a luxury boutique in Miami. The security deposit was charged to her mother credit card because Chelsea-owned cards were universally declined. The imported designer gown she walked down the aisle in was funded by 3 separate predatory lenders, charging 29% interest. Every single aspect of her lifestyle is a carefully constructed mirage funded by debt and the severe financial abuse of her younger sister." He paused, letting these devastating facts sink into the quiet room. He pointed a steady finger directly at the massive floral centerpieces and the untouched roasted turkey sitting on the table. "And to finalize the illusion, she wrote bad checks to the luxury country club to pay for our reception. When those checks inevitably bounced, her parents stole Sydney's social security number and committed a federal crime to cover the debt, effectively using stolen funds to pay for the very food sitting in front of you right now." The disgust radiating from Kendrick family was palpable and overwhelming. Judge Carter looked at Thomas and Brenda as if he had just scraped them off the bottom of his shoe. The polite, welcoming smiles that had greeted my family earlier in the evening were entirely gone, replaced by a wall of aristocratic, unified contempt. Thomas sank lower in his chair, his velvet smoking jacket suddenly looking like a cheap costume. Brenda covered her face with her trembling hands, completely unable to meet the piercing glares directed at her from every angle. Kendrick opened the massive legal binder and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it across the polished mahogany wood. It slid perfectly to a stop right in front of Chelsea, shaking hands. "I am a corporate litigator," Kendrick stated, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or affection. "I drafted a prenuptial agreement with a strict moral turpitude clause and a mandatory full financial disclosure requirement. You signed a sworn affidavit in front of a notary stating you had 0 unsecured debt. Those are official annulment papers. This marriage is completely void due to extreme financial fraud, identity misrepresentation, and breach of contract. My legal team filed them with the court first thing this morning. You are legally no longer my wife." Chelsea stared down at the manila envelope as if it were a live explosive. She shook her head frantically, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-streaked face. No, 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 she wailed, reaching out to grab his sleeve. You cannot do this. I love you, Kendrick. I did all of this because I wanted to be good enough for you. I wanted to fit into your world. You do not love me, Kendrick replied, stepping back so she could not touch him. You love my bank account. You love the social status my last name provides. But most importantly, you are a massive, unmitigated liability to my family legacy and my professional career. You have exactly 10 minutes to go upstairs, pack whatever cheap clothes you actually own, and get out of my house before I have my security team physically remove you from the premises. Brenda suddenly leaped up from her chair, desperate to salvage the ruins of her golden child life. Kendrick, please, you cannot just throw her out on the street. Brenda pleaded, her voice hysterical. We are family now. We can fix this. We will pay you back. You are not family. Judge Carter intervened, his deep, booming voice silencing Brenda instantly. You are con artists, and you will not speak another word in my son home. Sit down and remain completely silent until you leave. Brenda collapsed back into her chair, utterly defeated by the sheer authority of the retired federal judge. Chelsea was sobbing hysterically now, her face buried in her hands, realizing that the wealthy, glamorous life she had stolen and lied to secure was completely over. She had lost her rich husband, her luxury mansion, and her entire social standing in a matter of 5 minutes. I sat quietly at the head of the table, sipping my chilled white wine, watching the beautiful, absolute destruction of their fraudulent empire. The timing was perfect, and the best part was that the evening was still far from over. Thomas could not handle the suffocating weight of his total public ruin. He stared at me sitting calmly at the head of the table, realizing I was the absolute architect of his demise. A dangerous feral look crossed his face. He let out a furious guttural shout, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward so violently it crashed onto the polished hardwood floor. He lunged across the dining room toward me, his hands reaching out as if he wanted to physically strangle me for exposing his crimes. Kendrick relatives gasped in horror, and Judge Carter immediately stood up to intervene. But before Thomas could close the distance between us, a sharp, piercing sound stopped him completely dead in his tracks. It was the heavy brass doorbell echoing loudly through the grand foyer. It chimed twice perfectly, cutting through the thick, explosive tension of the room. A few guests glanced toward the hallway, perhaps assuming it was a late arrival, or the catering staff bringing in the dessert courses. But I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door. I checked my silver wristwatch. It was exactly 6:00. Kendrick gave a sharp nod to his private security detail stationed near the entrance. The guard pulled open the massive mahogany double doors. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps immediately filled the foyer, sounding completely unlike the soft tread of the catering staff. Detective Miller walked straight into the formal dining room, accompanied by 4 uniformed police officers and 2 federal agents, wearing dark windbreakers with Postal Inspector printed boldly across the back in bright yellow letters. Their utility belts clinked with handcuffs and radios, creating a stark, jarring contrast to the crystal chandeliers, the elegant holiday decor, and the untouched roasted turkey sitting on the table. The elite family members parted immediately, stepping back against the walls to give the law enforcement officers a wide, clear path. Detective Miller scanned the room, his eyes quickly locking onto my parents. Thomas and Brenda. Detective Miller announced, his voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. Please step away from the table and keep your hands completely visible. Brenda let out a high-pitched shriek, instinctively shrinking back against the wall as the 2 federal agents swiftly approached her. Thomas stood frozen in the middle of the room, his fists still clenched from his aborted lunge, toward me, staring at the badges flashing under the dining room lights. Thomas, you are being placed under arrest for felony identity theft and federal wire fraud, one of the postal inspectors stated firmly, grabbing Thomas by the arm and spinning him around. The metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. No, you have the wrong people, Brenda wailed frantically as a female officer approached her, pulling her arms firmly behind her back. We are good people. We did not steal anything. It was a family misunderstanding. Sydney, tell them it was just a simple misunderstanding. Tell them we are your family. I remained seated at the head of the table, my posture perfectly straight. You stole my social security number to take out a $50,000 loan and wired it across state lines, I replied coldly, ensuring every single wealthy relative heard the precise nature of her crimes. The federal government does not consider wire fraud a family misunderstanding. The officers began reading them their Miranda rights in perfect unison. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The familiar legal script sounded incredibly surreal, spoken over a luxurious Thanksgiving feast. It was the ultimate inescapable humiliation. Thomas and Brenda had spent their entire adult lives desperately chasing high society validation, and now they were being dragged out of a multi-million-dollar mansion in handcuffs, in front of a retired federal judge and his elite family. Chelsea watched her parents getting arrested, her entire body shaking violently. She realized no one was coming to save her. She turned her tear-streaked face back to Kendrick, falling to her knees right there on the expensive Persian rug. Kendrick, please, she begged, her voice raw and completely desperate. I have nowhere else to go. I have no money. You are my husband. You have to protect me. Please do not let them throw me out on the street. I will do whatever you want. Kendrick looked down at her with absolute chilling indifference. My lawyers will contact you regarding the annulment proceedings, he said flatly. Do not ever attempt to contact me or my family again. He snapped his fingers, signaling the two large private security guards who had been standing quietly by the door. The guards marched forward, grabbed Chelsea firmly by both arms, and hoisted her off the floor. One of the guards handed her a black plastic trash bag. It contained the few cheap, non-designer items of clothing she had brought with her before her massive shopping sprees on fraudulent credit. She screamed and thrashed, her emerald green silk dress bunching up awkwardly as the security team literally dragged her out of the formal dining room and down the main hallway. I stood up slowly, picking up my crystal wine glass, and walked gracefully toward the massive front windows of the mansion. Kendrick's wealthy relatives watched me pass in stunned silence, offering me a wide berth of respect. I stood by the glass, looking out over the sweeping circular driveway, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. I watched the officers push my father into the back of the first squad car, forcefully pressing their hands down on his head to clear the doorframe. My mother followed seconds later, crying hysterically as she was shoved into the second vehicle. Right across the driveway, Chelsea was standing barefoot on the cold gravel, sobbing uncontrollably while clutching her pathetic black trash bag as the heavy iron gates of the estate locked firmly in front of her. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chilled white wine. The crisp, refreshing taste perfectly matched the cold night air outside. The chaotic screaming was completely muted by the thick, soundproof glass of the mansion windows. For the first time in my 33 years of life, the suffocating burden of their constant financial demands, their cruel favoritism, and their relentless manipulation was entirely gone. I watched the squad cars pull away into the darkness, leaving Chelsea completely alone on the street. The beautiful, sweeping destruction was completely finished, and I felt nothing but absolute perfect peace. 6 months later, the crisp November air had given way to the heavy, humid heat of an Atlanta spring. I sat quietly in the back row of the federal courthouse downtown, my posture perfectly straight, wearing a sharp navy blue business suit. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom were closed, sealing us inside a quiet, deeply serious environment that smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. I watched the proceedings with the calm, detached observation of an auditor reviewing a finalized ledger. Sitting at the defense table, looking incredibly small and frail, were my parents. The transformation they had undergone in just 6 short months was absolutely staggering. Thomas was not wearing a velvet smoking jacket today. He wore an ill-fitting, cheap gray suit that hung loosely off his shoulders, his hair completely white and unkempt. Brenda sat beside him, stripped of her heavy pearl necklaces, and her arrogant swagger. She looked decades older, her shoulders hunched forward in defeat, staring blankly at the polished wooden table in front of her. They had spent their entire lives projecting an image of untouchable wealth and superior social standing. But the federal justice system has a unique way of stripping away every single illusion you have ever built. The prosecutor stood before the judge, summarizing the exact timeline of the identity theft and the wire fraud. Because I had handed Detective Miller and the postal inspectors a meticulously organized, completely bulletproof dossier of financial evidence, my parents had absolutely no room to maneuver. There was no lengthy trial. There was no dramatic cross-examination. Faced with the undeniable digital footprints, the IP address logs, and the routing numbers, their expensive defense attorney had strongly advised them to take a plea deal to avoid spending the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for financial crimes, looked down at them from her elevated bench. She delivered a blistering lecture on the severe betrayal of stealing a child identity, noting that familial relation does not mitigate the severity of a felony. She struck her wooden gavel, finalizing the sentence. Thomas and Brenda formally pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges. To avoid physical prison time due to their age and lack of prior criminal history, they were sentenced to 5 years of strict federal probation. But the true punishment was the financial devastation. The judge ordered them to pay full restitution alongside massive, crippling federal fines. To cover their exorbitant legal fees and the court-mandated penalties, they had been forced to liquidate their retirement accounts and sell their suburban home at a massive loss. Furthermore, the felony convictions meant their credit scores were permanently destroyed. They would never qualify for a mortgage, a car loan, or even a basic credit card, ever again. They were financially exiled, forced to move into a tiny rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city, living entirely on a restricted budget monitored constantly by their assigned probation officer. I watched the bailiff fingerprint them before they were allowed to leave the courtroom. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. They had gambled my entire future to fund a lie, and the house had finally won. Chelsea was conspicuously absent from the courtroom gallery. She was not there to support the parents who had ruined their own lives trying to protect her because she was entirely consumed by her own inescapable nightmare. Kendrick had not issued an empty threat on the night of the Thanksgiving disaster. He was a brilliant, ruthless corporate litigator, and he deployed his elite legal team with the precision of a military strike. The annulment proceedings in family court were swift and utterly brutal. Because Kendrick's team could easily prove that Chelsea had committed blatant perjury by signing the prenuptial affidavit while actively hiding $150,000 in toxic debt, the marriage was legally voided on the grounds of extreme fraud. Chelsea walked away from the brief marriage with absolutely nothing. No alimony, no settlement, and zero access to Kendrick's generational wealth. But the loss of the marriage was only the beginning of her karma. The viral video I had posted exposing her financial reality had completely obliterated her social media presence. The brands that once sponsored her had publicly cut all ties. The internet never forgets, and her name became synonymous with the absolute worst kind of influencer fraud. She was completely invisible in the digital world she used to dominate. Without her parents to bail her out, and without a wealthy husband to hide behind the massive mountain of unsecured credit card debt finally collapsed directly onto her shoulders. The 29% interest rates on the predatory loans she took out to buy her designer wedding dress compounded rapidly. She attempted to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy to wipe the slate clean, but the federal bankruptcy courts are incredibly strict. Debts incurred through intentional fraud and misrepresentation cannot be discharged. She was legally chained to the $150,000 forever. I actually saw her just a week ago. I was driving back to my apartment after a highly successful client meeting and decided to pull into the drive-through lane of a local fast food restaurant to grab an iced coffee. I pulled my reliable sedan up to the payment window and handed my debit card to the employee. When the sliding glass window opened to hand me my receipt, I froze. Standing there wearing a greasy polyester uniform shirt and a cheap paper visor was my older sister. The immaculate glowing influencer who had worn an emerald silk dress and a rented diamond tennis bracelet just 6 months ago was completely gone. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, her face was devoid of makeup, and her fingernails were chipped and raw from washing industrial equipment. She had been forced to take a minimum wage job just to appease the aggressive collection agencies garnishing her wages. Chelsea looked up to hand me the plastic cup. Our eyes met through the open window of my car. For a long, heavy second, the chaotic noise of the busy kitchen behind her seemed to completely fade away. She recognized me instantly. I saw a flash of profound shame, bitter regret, and absolute humiliation wash over her exhausted face. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, perhaps an apology or perhaps another excuse. But I did not need to hear it. I simply took my iced coffee from her trembling hand, gave her a brief, polite nod of acknowledgement, and rolled up my window. I put my car in drive and pulled smoothly out of the drive-through lane, merging onto the bright sunlit highway, leaving her entirely behind in the rearview mirror where she belonged. Driving away from that drive-through window felt like closing a heavy, dusty book I would never have to read again. My life moved forward with an incredible, undeniable momentum. At my forensic accounting firm, the viral video and the subsequent federal convictions of my parents did not make me a corporate pariah. In the corporate world of high-stakes financial investigations, competence and nerve are the ultimate currency. The senior managing partners recognized the absolute surgical precision with which I had dismantled a complex, multi-layered financial fraud under immense personal pressure. They saw a woman who could not be intimidated, manipulated, or blackmailed by public opinion. 2 weeks after the sentencing hearing concluded, I was officially called into the executive boardroom. They did not just offer me a formal apology for hastily placing me on administrative leave during the initial social media storm. They offered me a massive promotion. I was named the youngest senior investigator in the history of the firm. I was given my own dedicated team of junior analysts, a beautiful corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a significant salary increase that I immediately invested into a highly diversified, secure portfolio. I no longer spent my 80-hour work weeks paying off bright pink eviction notices or funding fake influencer lifestyles. Every single dollar I earned belonged entirely to me, and my career trajectory was limitless. When the month of November rolled around again, marking exactly 1 year since the disastrous country club wedding and the explosive Thanksgiving dinner in Buckhead, I did not feel a single ounce of anxiety or grief. I did not receive a sweet, manipulative phone call from Brenda begging for a second chance. I did not have to endure Thomas demanding a financial bailout to save his bruised ego. Instead, I packed a single, elegant leather suitcase and boarded a first-class flight to Paris. I spent Thanksgiving Day walking along the Seine River, wrapped in a warm cashmere coat, entirely surrounded by a small group of colleagues and close friends who actually valued my presence. We did not eat a traditional roasted turkey or sit at a tense, heavily guarded mahogany table, waiting for the next explosive argument to erupt. We sat outside at a beautiful little bistro in the Marais district, eating fresh croissants, dining on rich duck confit, drinking exquisite red wine, and laughing until our sides physically ached. There was no screaming. There were no fake designer watches, no rented diamond tennis bracelets, and absolutely no hidden credit card debts. There was only genuine connection, profound mutual respect, and the absolute beauty of a life completely unburdened by toxic obligations. I looked around that bistro table and realized a fundamental truth. Family is not a biological mandate. Family is a conscious choice. It is made up of the exact people who protect your peace, celebrate your genuine successes, and never ask you to shrink yourself down to make them feel larger. Looking back on the entire harrowing ordeal, I often think about that bright yellow paper badge the wedding planner handed me at the entrance of the luxury country club. Limited access guest. My mother intended it to be the ultimate insult, a cruel and public way to put me in my designated place and remind me of my supposed insignificance. But she was entirely wrong. That cheap piece of paper was actually my golden ticket to absolute freedom. Being explicitly denied access to their fraudulent, superficial world was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. It provided the necessary emotional distance to finally see the stark, terrifying truth. In modern society, we are constantly conditioned to believe that blood is thicker than water. We are repeatedly told to forgive and forget to keep the peace at all costs and to silently absorb the abuse simply because they are family. But financial abuse is not a quirky family dynamic. Identity theft is not a simple misunderstanding born out of desperation. It is a profound violation. It is a deliberate, calculated attempt to extract your hard-earned resources and destroy your future security for their own selfish aesthetic gain. You should never feel guilty for setting strict, impenetrable boundaries with people who treat your bank account like their own personal emergency fund. And if they cross the line into criminal behavior, you must never be afraid to press charges. The federal justice system does not care if the person who stole your social security number gave birth to you. The law exists to protect you, and you have every right to use it to defend your livelihood. Cutting off toxic blood relatives is terrifying, incredibly painful, and deeply stigmatized by a society that does not understand the reality of emotional and financial manipulation. But the profound peace that follows the storm is worth every single moment of the brutal fight. The air is sweeter, the nights are completely quiet, and the future finally belongs entirely to you. If you are watching this and feeling trapped by the crushing weight of family manipulation, if you are acting as the silent shock absorber for people who resent your success, I need you to know that you are not crazy, you are not selfish, and you are absolutely not alone. You have the power to walk away, to freeze your credit, to gather your receipts, and to completely rewrite your own narrative. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a toxic family member, or discovered a shocking financial secret they were actively hiding from you? How did you finally break free from their control and reclaim your independence? I want you to share your stories of survival and strength in the comments below. Let us build a community that celebrates establishing boundaries, protecting our peace, and demanding the respect we deserve. Please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel to hear more true stories about forensic investigations, financial independence, and taking back your life. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, your worth is never determined by the people who fail to see it, and your greatest revenge is simply living a beautiful, authentic, and completely free life.